I would like to start the conversation with the same question I asked the first panelist. Where do you see AI and robotics changing, your areas of expertise? What do you see today that wasn't there just, a couple of years ago that totally transformed everything that we are doing today?
I think definitely AI is got a lot of room to grow. That's the important thing to keep in mind. And second thing I would like to emphasize is we need to focus on the positives of AI. If we do that, I think we could bring AI in a meaningful way to a lot of the aspects of life. One of the projects that I've been involved in, we value a home based on its curb appeal. That was my first foray into AI. We teach a machine how to grade the curb appeal of homes, and we use images from Google Street View cameras, and then with other information about a home size, etc., we were able to do that. Now, scaling, etc. So, what is the use, right? Is it just an academic exercise? So we started building cameras that would go around and pick up code violations. City code violation inspectors, they catch about 5 to 10% of violations. 90% of them go unchecked. What this does is goes around the city and then picks those that are violations and sends all the details to the code inspector. This doesn't take away the job of the inspector, makes them much better. And we had a wonderful issue pointed out by someone from the last panel. What about biases? Is it going to pick bad neighborhoods, etc.? So that was the first and foremost issue that was in our minds. We solved that. We hope we solved that by putting this camera on a garbage truck. It goes through every neighborhood. And then not only that, we had to teach how to detect code violations using pictures from both good, bad, worse, however you want to label the neighborhoods. Despite that, we have to teach the machine how to find code violations in different types of neighborhoods. And it's slowly getting adopted by a bunch of cities, city governments for the most part. So overall, I believe that there's still a lot of room to grow. And we have to keep in mind that we're not introducing biases, making bad problems worse. One of the positives we learned from one of the cities is that, in some of the neighborhoods, you have retirees living. They have no idea that the paint is peeling off, there's a problem in their roof. Instead of sending them a threatening note, like some say, hey, you got to fix this, otherwise you're going to pay this fine, they're probably living on Social Security, right? And the cities have slush funds they could use at their perusal. And one of the things they found out is if we could get ahead of the problem before the code violation becomes something really bad, they could actually, instead of charging them, use that money to fix that problem, and it's a very low-cost issue, etc. So again, I believe that there's a long way for AI to grow, and as I said in this example, I don't think it's per se taking the job away, at least as far as I can see. It makes someone's job so much better, and in this example, it can, if the city wants to, make a community better as well by getting ahead of certain problems.
Let me take a slightly different perspective. I have two interests. One is how do marketers try and sell their products to consumers, and how do consumers react to such communications, whether it be advertising or elsewhere. And in that, The interface could be at the retail store, could be elsewhere in virtual worlds or real. We are seeing quite a bit of artificial intelligence and robots enter the fray. Um, and in retail stores perspective, how do consumers react to it? Academia, through research, we know quite a bit about how do people interface with it. I, for example, study human facial emotion. I also study eye tracking. And so, um, how do such inputs matter in making better AI systems, making better systems that can uh, capture non-verbal communication and provide inputs. And those inputs could be at the early stages in information processing, could be at the later stages. We are looking at other kinds, right? So product returns. So, for example, when you sell a product, it probably touches one hand, sometimes two. But when a product is returned, it touches multiple hands. And so, how can robots and artificial intelligence minimize the cost for a firm? Um, the third thing that we're looking at is sleep deprivation. I'm guessing a few of you here are sleep deprived. Um, Working with UT Southwestern's lab, we have a great interest in understanding how people that are sleep deprived um, make decisions. And this could be mundane decisions like what kind of coffee do you order, to life threatening decisions on how do I drive my car when I'm sleep deprived, and should I or should I not drive in the first place. And so we're looking at all kinds of consumption decisions, and maybe there is a space for external input for not just vulnerable populations or people that have learning disabilities, for each one of us when we are temporarily disabled, cognitively impaired because of our sleep being one of those that hinders that. There's quite a bit that we can talk, but as a teaser, for example, one thing that we do know through research is that um, robots that are more likely to be identified as female are liked more and are more likely to convince people, irrespective of how cute they are, what they look like, etc. And so we are also looking at cultural differences, social differences in how we react to these. And maybe there are specific questions that you have that we could address, but for I'll go with what you are asking in terms of what's the future for these. I think it's to be tested. We still are learning quite a bit on how we react to these. There's consumer persuasion knowledge. Whenever we are being persuaded, we kick back. So when we know that we're being persuaded by an inanimate object that is anthropomorphized, that looks like human, our BMW cars, our cars look human now. They have a smiley on them. Our phones have cameras on them. It's creepy that most of them look human. And when we look at those, we react in different ways. Sometimes when we're being persuaded by such objects, we push back. So there is the negative aspect. As an academic, I also teach. And so one of the things that worries me is how do my students um, use AI and ChatGPT to cheat on assignments and exams. And so that worries me as a negative aspect.
Okay, thank you. So my background is more in computer science and engineering side of things, so I have to be different from real estate and marketing. So my interest on the research side, and I think that could be of interest to other robotic companies as well, is on mixed initiative robots and cobots. So a mixed initiative robot, for those of you who are not familiar with that, is I would try to explain it briefly. So we are all familiar with robots in terms of acting by themselves. They're called autonomous robots, right? So sometimes you feel it's creepy, right? So they're doing things by themselves, and you feel that what happens if it does something bad, right? And now when you are deploying robots in some critical applications or scenarios where you don't know whether the robot would be doing the right thing or what should the robot be doing, and then you have this mixed initiative control. What that means is the humans can take over control of the robot and guide it, right? So you can visualize one human tracking multiple robots, right? You can imagine like a Zoom screen or a Team screen, right, with multiple windows, each window showing a robot, and you taking over a particular robot when there is a need for that. And the other thing is cobot, right? So what's a cobot? It's kind of like a, if you're used to teleoperation kind of thing, right? What is teleoperation? You are sitting here, but something needs to be done in Dallas downtown, or let's say Washington DC, or elsewhere in Europe or South America, right? Your expertise is needed, but you cannot fly down there, or you don't have time, right? So now you control from here, and it's as if like you are it's an extension of your body, right? So it's different from mixed initiative, because you are going to be continuously operating a robot at the remote side. It's called a cobot, right? So that's what people try to do in robotic surgery and things like that. So there are other possibilities where there is a lot of room to grow, where robots can be deployed with human expertise, with human control, that would be safer to use, of course, assuming that humans are safer in that context.
Thank you. Another question. I mean, you're all prominent researchers. I mean, you have a lot of experience in your fields. What do people get totally wrong when they think about AI, when they think about robotics? What would you wish people knew about this type of technologies before they use them, or come to you with a question, or ask for advice or whatnot?
This is similar to any new technology. There's always going to be negatives, but for some reason, 90% of the product has positive impact, but there's some negatives, but everybody's focused on the negatives. So those that are coming up with these products should accept the negatives and say that we are working and getting past it, and focus a lot on the positives, how it can improve lives, improve, I teach real estate and finance, improve profitability, and so on and so forth. I think the focus on the positives is something that I see that is very lacking, and as a result, there is this worry and negative perception of robots and AI to begin with. And again, the inventors have to spend a lot of time as well thinking about some of the obvious negatives. There's a lot of research in academia about bias in AI. Could be racism, could be religious bias, could be, there's a whole host of things. So inventors also have to take into account all those and be ready to answer some of the concerns instead of saying, hey, I've got a shiny new beautiful product. I think the more focus on positives and how it can improve lives and livelihood would go a long way.
So thinking about AI and robotics, and so a couple of thoughts from some of the research that's been done before. One of the things is behavioral mimicry, right? So robots, for example, mimicking human emotion, and how do people look at that, right? So a surprising part of this is, if you learn from humans, one of the things that we would do is that the more the mimicry, the better, right? But are there conditions under which robots should exhibit emotions of a particular kind? So, for example, happiness. So, robots showing happiness, or for example, surprise or sadness or negative emotions based on what? And so, research, for example, says that the best thing that the robot can do is show surprise more so than any other emotion. And so, while we talk in terms of what should be done, right? What's the first question that people ask is they think that every emotion is exactly the same, but there are specifics within that could be different. And the second aspect to this notion of when you look at robots AI is you think of products, you think of AI or robots as being either a substitute, it is more likely that most of us have evolved. And from the previous panel discussion, would we survive in this world? We would survive was the instantaneous question, is that we find ways for it to become complementary rather than a substitute, correct? So if you were to take retail jobs per se or sales jobs and you look at front end, one of the most important revelations is that most of those jobs are disappearing and are being taken by robots or by artificial intelligence agents. And so now the question is, yes, those might go away, but there might be others that might come that might be complementary to what the decision maker here, who's the consumer or the marketer, right, might require. And so the second might be that not all are substitutes and there's complementary possibilities. In fact, value added complementary possibilities.
So people say habits die hard, right? I'm a professor at the end of the day, so I'm going to ask you a question. What is the most important innovation that happened in mankind so far? Pardon? Internet, refrigerator. You would say robot, right? Well, I told you I'm a computer science professor, but I listened to a neuroscience professor, so the answer is not mine. So the neuroscience professor said the most important innovation is fire, and the human ability to control fire, because that kind of helped humans to cook food and keep it for some time, right? So, and that freed human time. People didn't have to hunt every day, and that gave them the time to think. And she was basing it was a she, the professor was a she was basing her argument on the number of neurons in the brain as she tracked them from whatever number of years she could track. And that's the reason, she said, right? So what am I coming to? I think we are all used to focusing on negatives, the problems, but at the end of the day, I mean, when you get more free time, people say, um, it, sometimes devils come out, but sometimes good things come out too, right? So it's up to us to channel, right? At the end of the day, AI, machine learning, robots are tools that we need to use, we need to deploy, right? So you can have a hammer and you can use it for positive purposes or negative purposes, right? But it's going to give you more time. And how you use the time, that is up to us.
So you mentioned ChatGPT. I promised myself to go one day without saying ChatGPT once. Okay, in the past 5-6 months, it didn't happen. And honestly, I'm using it every single day. Full disclosure, it helped me actually create the questions for this panel, for the previous panel as well. I'm using it all the time. Now, my question to you, using this type of technologies, okay, generative images, videos, and all of that, obviously text, and are we as humanity, are we getting smarter or dumber? That's the question.
I'll follow that up with a different question. Um, I'll use a real estate example. If you look at a bank from 50 years ago, there were tens, maybe hundreds of folks in a large bank that had ledgers, they were writing, that's how they were doing accounting. Then there's this box called a computer that was invented, and that dramatically reduced the number of bankers we have. Did that make bankers any worse? I don't think so. I think softwares, to me, helps you understand a problem maybe you never thought existed. It helps you simulate a certain type of problem and find the outcome, which you may not have an example in practice for. So my thought is, AI definitely helps you make a better person. Again, banks banks have gotten better overall. Some other technology has come in and filled that office space. So I think technology in general, if you believe that computer is sort of a front runner for AI, or at the beginning of AI, so to speak, it did make us all better, make us all smarter, made us more productive, I think. So that's my thought.
So let me look at it like from a psychologist's point of view. So when Wikipedia was available, one of the things that most of us said was that most of our memory, that is how much we would remember, how much we would depend on stuff, would be limited because we would look less internally than we would look externally, correct? So right now, most of us have adapted ourselves to an environment where Wikipedia or information exists, and so I don't need to store it in my long-term memory. Now, as for any decision that you need to make, you need inputs to those decisions, memory being one of those, correct? Your own learning could help put things into long-term memory and bring it to short-term memory when you make a decision. But having resources like ChatGPT, etc., might help provide better inputs to a decision. But having said that, most of us would recognize that if we relied on others to make decisions constantly, we would, one, feel less in control, and two, the quality of our decision making might not be as good. So the question then would be, how can we evolve in a system where this decision aid is available and we use it to decisions that maximize the benefits of those decisions, correct? We are yet to see how we evolve. And so some of those decisions, for example, could be, how do you create a new product? And maybe there are ways and means that ChatGPT could, or any AI tool could go through patents, for example, and identify what has or has not been done, which we might not have access to, and we might have gone down the line for us in our new product development process. But having that early on means that we can make these decisions better. We, for example, me and some of my PhD students, we're looking at Shark Tank data and how should you pitch, right? So we're looking at the tonal capacity, right? So, for example, how should uh, somebody who's pitching to the judges, how should they pitch? What should they say? Meaning, is a joke always good? Making a fool of yourself always good, right? And so we've looked at some of those, and we are still in the process of running the models, but we can understand quite a bit on this, and so maybe that's a decision that this helps us with. But I think it's a piece by piece. We'll have to find out, right, how these are, and maybe towards the end we'll come up with cumulative knowledge that tells us that there are areas in which it's better than others.
So just a small tip for you. If you don't want to say ChatGPT every day, you can use large language model, LLM. So kind of like, you can cheat. You can cheat a little bit. I would have a couple of different responses for you. I think the first response is, like, as a researcher, right? When we come up with ideas, we write research papers. And one important criteria for success as a researcher is that the idea should be accepted by our peers. Right? So it goes through, whatever we write goes through a peer review process. And during the peer review process, the peer reviewer, if he or she points out, hey, this has been done before, and you didn't look at it or you didn't refer to it, right? It's shut down. So there is no second prize when you are an inventor. Right? And now, when you have these tools like large language models, right, you have the ability to do a more thorough search, right? And you get to know, instead of waiting for 6 months for the peer reviewers to say, that's kind of like similar to what this guy did, and you have wasted 6 months now, right? So your productivity can go up, right? So as I said earlier, like, I mean, these are tools and you can use it to your advantage. Another example is I was recently in an IEEE meeting and people were talking about ChatGPT, like what happens if ChatGPT comes up with new ideas, innovative ideas? Who does it belong to? I mean, things like that. And I was like, this is getting scarier. We are talking about ChatGPT as a human, and to my knowledge, it's not there yet. And I told them, if IEEE as a professional body, you are going to think like that, then how the public and others are going to look like, at these technologies, right? So at the end of the day, they are tools. They are not innovating by themselves, at least as of now. So I don't think we should be worried about
Just add one more. Um, Almost all creativity has to do with originality, correct? And then the usefulness of that particular idea. Now, if all of us use ChatGPT, which is the same common resource, then the originality of those that it spits out is dependent on the algorithm and its intricacies. Now, the question then becomes, how do you evaluate the originality of any idea? And if we, as researchers, we look at papers that are written by academics, goes through ChatGPT, or students' essays goes through that, or, for example, somebody's email to their boss, right, or a performance appraisal done goes through ChatGPT. Now, the originality of those might suffer. Now, the perception of originality is authenticity, how we perceive things as original. If you were to present your original self, I would think you're being authentic. If you do not present your original stuff, or I perceive that there's something hidden, I feel it's not as authentic. One of the key things with authenticity is trust, that it makes me less trusting of what I look at, right? And so the position then becomes, how do we ensure that things are trustworthy, correct? I, there are other examples that I could use, but
Awesome, thank you. And actually, this brings me to my next question. In robotics, in AI, there is this concept that's called the uncanny valley, which we don't want to cross. The uncanny valley says when a robot or technology looks too close to be human, okay, either as a robot or AI or whatever, we revolt. We like reject it. We don't want that. This should be a machine and I'm a human, and there is a line that should not be crossed, right? Now, with the advancements that we are seeing now and the pace of these advancements, probably we'll get to that point that we won't be able to distinguish anymore. I mean, computers already crossed the Turing test, right? I mean, the Turing test is a test that basically we put a human and a computer behind screen, and someone needs to talk to the other side only using a keyboard and reading text, and try to understand which one is the human and which one is the machine. Computers already solved that a few years ago. But when will we know that we got to that point? Or maybe we'll never know, because they're getting too good, for our own good. So that's kind of, maybe we can start from the other side today.
I think it's a difficult question to answer because it's kind of where we are on our perception. And as a researcher, that's our goal, to make AI, machine learning, and robot to be as good as human, to be reaching that level of perfection. So, in some sense, we would be failing as researchers if we don't get to that goal, right? So, I wouldn't say we want to reject it because that's our goal. You're touching on our livelihood, right? In some sense, right? So, if we say this is fine, stop here, then what am I going to do tomorrow waking up? what would my students do, right, when they come in, right? So the other thing is, like, you look at any technology, right? So I was curious about this kind of like Netflix series on cable girls, and I don't know whether it's a old serial, right? That talked about the telephone exchanges where people had to patch calls through using cables, right? So manually they take a cable, ask for the number, and put the cable to the other number so the calls go through. And when machines were replacing it, like humans were protesting, and humans were saying it's going to make mistakes and you're going to have a lot of false calls and things like that. But imagine now, if we have to pick up our cell phone right now for texting or calling, you have to go through a human operator. It's humanly impossible. So I think the way I would look at this uncanny valley is hopefully it's shifting. It's not one valley. As we grow with our technology, our mindset grows because we have more things to deal with in our day-to-day life. And so we are happy that some of our problems are taken care by the machines, whether they look like human or not, whether they behave like human or not. So in that sense, I don't see uncanny valley as a fixed destination that should be avoided. But hopefully it's like a mirage. As you go closer, it moves away from you.
Let me try and explain what this is with two papers. One was published in the Journal of Marketing Research, where they looked at when you see there's unease when you are interacting with a robot, and when this unease then makes you change your behavior. So one of the things that they found is that when people are faced with making a decision in front of a robot, or robot acts as your sales agent, one of the things that they found was that people's self-identity, we as humans have identities, that identity gets threatened. And when it gets threatened, what people do is they actually compensate. And so they called it compensatory consumption. So people actually purchased, when they were buying from robots, more status purchases. That is, instead of buying a regular brand, you would buy a status brand. And people consumed more. So they looked at how much food was eaten, people consumed more, right? But they found that this went away when externally you were able to change people's sense of belonging, right? So there are conditions under which you could make this unease go away. That's the first paper. The second, which is much more recent, which is published in a journal called JAMS, which is Journal for the Academy for Marketing Science. They looked at every paper that was published in the past that looked at when a robot or any device that was akin to a robot was trying to influence people, and so was the influence positive or negative. So if people perceive this as being less anthropomorphic, less human-like, would it be better, right? And so this particular is called a meta-analysis. What they did is they looked at every paper that was published and synthesized, because some papers said being human is bad for robots. In other cases, they said being less human is bad. This paper synthesized, if I remember correctly, 108 either papers or 108 effects, right? And so they found unambiguously that being more human is better. For robots to be more human is better. Now the condition is, are there cases under which it would be less likely? Of course, correct? And are we progressing to a situation where we are able to decipher if these are human like or if these are machines, correct? We've already progressed, right? So our displays now are more than retina display, correct? So I can't even decipher it's better than my eye can decipher, right? My display screens on my computers. So when those become, then we get to a host lot of problems, correct? Where we have to first, there's a two-stage process there. Do we trust something is human or not human? And then we make a decision conditional on the fact that it is not human, how we decide, right? But we've not reached that stage yet. And right now, the synthesis of the literature is it's for us to be human-like.
My first interaction of a humanoid was at the London Heathrow Airport. It was basically a humanoid that was saying, ask me a question, I'll tell you anything about your next steps of travel, etc. You want to guess how many people were standing in front of it and asking questions? There were a bunch of them placed at different places. 0. Out of curiosity, I was the one asking questions. It did answer questions really well. So what's the next step? I just got off the plane. Questions as simple as that. It gave me directions to get to security and how to get to my connecting flight and all that. So from a functionality standpoint, it was excellent. But so the way it looked was there was a light projector from behind. It was a flat screen. If you go to the side and look at it, just for some reason, people didn't feel like they wanted to go and ask a question. It's as simple as that. Right? So I think I'd side with Narayan's point that I think when human identity is slightly threatened, people tend to somewhat shy away from, I don't know why, but that seems to be true from an observation standpoint. It works really well from, any question related to travel. It's able to, it knows ins and outs of the airports and everything. But I think when that human identity is threatened, people tend to shy away from it. So that I think maybe we need more work to be done in that area.
If you have a teenager, you might have experienced it. We were in a situation where we had to resolve something, and I was telling my daughter, "Why don't you call a human operator?" And she said, "I don't want to talk to a human."
So if I could just add one, we're actually finding that when people are sleep deprived, there are shows about these, right? So you probably want to go sleep, and so you want, it's a case where you want to disassociate from a human. So there are cases where social inclusion, exclusion, your need for human becomes lesser versus more, or need for interaction. And then by nature, each one of us has a predisposition for interactions, right? Some of us wanted more, and others are okay with a little less. And all of those we have found influence, right? The adoption for these kinds of.
Thank you. So I have a question for you, Professor Janakiraman. We are entering the elections season. It's coming, it's coming. And, we all heard about, Trump 8 years ago working with Cambridge Analytica and all of these things, and how they, re-engineer social media and everything in order to, get people to vote this or that. Doesn't matter right now. It's not about the opinion; it's about the technology behind that. And I'm trying to understand what has changed in the past 8 years. Now, 8 years is a long period in technology, and a lot has changed. How can we, be sure that, with large language models, not ChatGPT, and generative, images, and we have deep fakes that make, videos, and we don't even know if the person that we're seeing on a video or on a picture is the actual person. We have people brought from the dead, Abraham Lincoln just, telling stories. How can we trust what we see, when it comes to these kind of things? What type of technologies we have as a, call it a countermeasure, right? On the other side, to decide if, what we see is real, is relevant.
I'm guessing this is a particular touchy topic, right? Yeah, but one of the things that I found is an association for consumer research, where researchers from some of the leading schools come and present. I was struck last time by a series of presentations that was done on such kinds of topics, right? So, for example, if I were to take candidate A photograph and morph it with candidate B's, except that I don't make it blatantly obvious. So I take 80% of A and 20% of B. So you can't find out the difference, right? But subconsciously, we are drawn towards it slightly more than what you would be before if you're independent, right? Not leaning towards that person. And so such kinds of things. Now, who polices that and who monitors that? Because that form of persuasion is not yet under the regulation, if you were to think of it. It's scary because, again, what should or should not be regulated, right? So, for example, if you want to know my authentic about a particular position, it could be anything, it could be education, it could be anything else. I have a I study political ideology too. And so, for example, one of the stuff is if you throw it chat GPT or etc., it with acceptable position, particular topic, and I could use it. And now, more so than before, is available real time. Previously, I would not have it on my computers, I would not have it elsewhere, right? We are finding that some of these are scary and it affects segments differently than others. So if you conservative, likely to be influenced by fear motives as compared to, say, a promotion focus that works for liberals. And so now I change the tone of my message and morph it with 80/20 in a way that might be much more palatable to you, correct? We are yet to see. So some of these are being used and being used far quickly than what regulation catch. And even regulation depends on the parties and how much they want to, right? And so it's um, that's the tricky part that I navigated. But the more persuasion part, when we are likely to be persuaded, there are certain hooks, correct? So, for example, reciprocity is a hook. If I smile at you, you're going to smile back, correct? And so I could use the reciprocity hook for me to become much better at being a persuading object to you. Like that is behavioral mimicry. The way you sit, I sit, you like me better. Right? And so, or for example, I use a cultural icon similar to you in convincing you than me myself. And so that works.
Awesome, thank you. And I have a similar question to you with, again, AI and robotics and everything, just taking step in every part of our lives. How cities are transforming when it comes to smart cities, connected cities. When we have delivery robots, delivery drones, one day maybe it will happen. When we have automatic everything, transportation and so on. From your point of view, how do you see cities change and transform with the help of technology?
There's two types of innovations. One is basically saying, I'm not going to worry about the regulations and everything that is out there because that puts too many walls around my thinking. I'm going to first innovate and then worry about the regulations later. Uber, loosely speaking, is an example. And there are others that don't want that risk, that I come up with a really innovative product, but I can't bring it to market. So those are two simultaneous things that are happening. Some basically are saying, I have a product now let's put some band-aids on it. Which one would I recommend? I would probably think a wholesome product where you already consider some of the cities just can't change. That's the bottom line, right? Real estate is a very unique asset. When you have demand, you can put in supply. When the demand goes away, you can't reconfigure. Once you build a city, it outlives you basically. So that's one big problem. So for all the innovators out there, the city is going to be there. It's going to outlive you. It's going to outlive your products for the most part. So the important thing is, I think, to think about what could be some of the constraints that, given the city is the way it is would offer and incorporate that into the products. I think that's extremely important. A city outright would not want to violate their own laws, etc., and rules that are in place. They may be able to bend a little bit, but not completely, violate things. So overall, going back to Elad's question, cities are embracing AI more and more. One, for productivity reasons. Two is quality of work. We have this habit, especially in Texas, we teach our kids that don't trust the government. We think that government enterprises do a lousy job, and they're using more technology and AI to, one, obviously do a better job, and they are adopting. That's the bottom line. They're adopting new technologies, etc., within their existing framework still.
Thank you. Okay, and maybe one last question. I want to end with the same question I asked the previous panel: is AI and robotics the humanity sunrise or sunset? Okay, from your point of view.
Sunrise or sunset? I'm gonna ignore those two. So it's like I said. So one of the settings I think everyone talked about healthcare. This at the previous panel. One of the areas that AI and maybe some humanoids might play a big role to me is senior living. During COVID, a lot of senior living places got affected disproportionately higher than the general population. A lot of them shut down for good. What followed after was, what cannot be denied is we have an aging population. We need more of them, not less of those facilities going forward, at least for the next decade or so. 2028, 2030, we will have the last of baby boomers that are going to retire, right? What were the pain points that made these places shut down? One is transmission of the virus. That's what we heard over the last several years. Whoever's working there, ended up transmitting the virus to COVID, in this case, to the resident there. They got very sick, they died, etc. So the risk level of a resident went up because of that interaction. Now, what is happening even worse is banks are denying funding to anybody that says, I'm going to develop a senior living facility. I teach real estate as well. Senior living facilities from a financial standpoint were low risk facilities. The residents don't shop around. Once they find a good place, they stay, etc. But after COVID, only now they're slowly opening up their purses to funding those. Imagine replacing that person with a robot in there, a humanoid or whoever it is that you could bring in. That dramatically reduces the risk of that business. COVID was the latest problem. If you look in the last 10 years, there were a lot of elder abuse, sexual abuse, and you name it, right? So those were issues that were roiling in there. Can we do better? I think AI and robotics has an answer to that problem. So to me, I think there's a lot of room to grow. Sunrise or sunset, I guess it's a sunrise. Going forward, that's just one example I can think of. To in finance, we always think about risk. Can deploying a robot or AI or whatever that is in there, can it reduce the risk of my business? I think that's a question that everybody can ask. And when you go to a bank for a loan or to an investor for funding for a business idea, risk is on the top of their head. Can you use robotics as a tool to show that, hey, the perceived risk is pretty low and get moving, from funding from a bank or from other areas? I think robotics has a big role to play in that.
The way I think about most of these disruptions, whether the disruption is technology oriented and which came as online, the internet versus now robotics, etc., or non-technology disruptions that have happened, is that irrespective of when and where these disruptions happen, the ones that can adapt, survive, and go on, and the ones that can't die, right? So in any climate change, the dinosaurs that become extinct first, correct? And so you can imagine that this is another climate change of that nature, a technology-based climate change. And in this technology base, there's going to be an introduction, a growth, and possibly maturity before the next one is going to be upon us. And the ones that can navigate this space well will thrive, and the others that won't well. But as humans, most of us will adapt and will adapt to our needs are the same, right? I mean, we always had the needs to listen to music. It just was on a CD, then it became another device, and then we got it now on a shared system, correct? We've had need for entertainment, and those needs were previously circus, now it's Cirque du Soleil, correct? And so you can imagine there are needs are few and needs are constant, and so those needs are going to exist, surpass this particular disruption. But it is who is going to deliver on those needs better, correct, is going to make them a success or failure.